Horror Month. You are all my maniacs now.
Alright, horror fans, this is it. The final nightmare.
This is number 7 in the Nightmare on Elm Street series.
I feel like the guy from part 6 going bing, bing, bing.
Wes Craven's New Nightmare, because they actually brought Wes Craven back to do this film.
Now, I have only ever seen this movie maybe twice. This might have been my 3rd or 4th time seeing it, because I just watched it like 6 months ago and just watched it again last night. And, you know, once you get through 6 films, you start thinking to yourself, well, I wonder what Wes Craven would have done with this series if he ever came back. Well, here you go. You don't have to worry about it or wonder about it. Here is what he would have done with this series. It's a weird movie, and I understand, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street are supposed to be strange, weird movies, but this is just a weird film for the fact that he is taking the actress, Heather Langenkamp, putting her in the movie as the actress, getting attacked by a fictional character that she knows is a fictional character because she's trying to portray herself as a real person, but she is getting attacked by something that was in the movies that she was in, trying to portray as it wasn't real. Did you understand any of that? Because I didn't.
If you're gonna bring Freddy out of a dream, this is pretty much the way you do it. I mean, I love the idea, the whole idea that there's this entity that has now become Freddy, or is taking over the role as Freddy. And he's coming out of the nightmares and into the reality of the people who made the film. Because the whole concept here was kind of like pre-Scream. It was like all of a sudden, you know, the things that we all saw in the films, how does that actually affect the audience? How does that actually affect the people that make the movies? How does that affect the actors and actresses? You know, how would that affect the director and the writers? And I loved it. I loved the whole idea of it. The whole concept of it was absolutely and totally Wes Craven, and I loved it.
Well, I thought it was okay.
I loved it.
Again, when I was watching this, the first thing that I thought of was how different this movie would have been if it wasn't Heather Langenkamp, if it was actually Nancy in the movie, not her portraying her as herself, but being actual Nancy in the film and having Nancy become a actress and then have her make these movies with Nightmare on Elm Street because she went through them herself. So now she actually went back and made them into a film because, you know, of what happened to her. And then Freddy himself is becoming a real again because they're wanting her to come back to make more. And I think that right there would have been a brilliant film rather than just having her portray herself in this.
Okay, everything you said right there was weird. You got weird on me, Dave. That just sounds... I mean, some of what you said is exactly what happens in this movie. She realizes she has to become Nancy again.
Well, I'm not done yet. You know, again, I was thinking about this for almost the entire film, and then when John Saxon calls her Nancy, my wife was sitting there and she's like, you know, he just called her Nancy. I was like, yeah, I know. I said, that's kind of weird. Because in order to get rid of Freddy, she had to become Nancy. Even though she was Heather Langenkamp in the movie, she became Nancy. She became the character to confront Freddy. And that part I loved. I loved that idea. I loved that concept because that's what I wanted the whole film to be, was her being Nancy going after Freddy. And that's what the last half of this film was, really.
I loved it. I loved the whole concept of it. I loved the whole idea that she had to become Nancy to kill Freddy one more time. And to be done with it. You know, even though this is the new nightmare, I mean, that was actually just to be done with Freddy once and for all. She had to become Nancy again. And I love the whole idea of it. I love the fact that she goes into this weird world that's where Freddy's, you know, it's the boiler room, but it's also kind of like this ancient place where this demon is. And then there's the whole thing with her kid. And I liked that too. I liked the whole thing where not only is he, because throughout the movies, that's what he always tried to do, is to attack innocence. And that's where he's going after her kid as well.
Once again, I can say when you throw a kid in the movie, this is where you jump the shark. Anytime you got to put a kid in the film, yeah, it is. Anytime you got to introduce some bad acting kid in the film, you're like, well, we got to have a kid in this movie. That's the point where it gets bad.
That was a kid from Pet Sematary, by the way.
Leave kids out of these movies, unless they're good actors, and this kid was not a good actor.
I didn't mind him. I didn't mind him at all. I mean, he did what he had to do.
I mean, there are some really good kid actors. This wasn't one of them. He definitely was not one of them.
I thought he was fine. I mean, for the role, I didn't look at him as being an Oscar-winning actor, but I thought he did a great job as this.
The Freddy glove is basically, which I always thought was weird watching this movie, is the glove from the original poster, where she's like sitting in a bed and his hands coming down over the top of her, and he's like skull, bones, and he has like red whatever veins or wires or that's this glove in this movie.
I love it.
And the look of Freddy was interesting too. It looked like he wasn't burnt in the film.
I love it.
He was Freddy, and they just peeled parts of his skin off, which was a weird look.
I love it.
I liked the look of that. I thought it was a bizarre look for him, but it was an interesting look.
I love it. And once again, this was David Miller doing the makeup. But this time around, he actually made Freddy look more like what he probably should have done with Nightmare 5 and 6. You know, where he was integrating his makeup as well as Kevin Yeager's. But this one, he actually made Freddy look like a concept that they had from the very beginning, which is why he also has the hat and the trench coat and the sweater and the glove that he has. I mean, it's all from Wes Craven's original look of Freddy from the very, very, very beginning.
I mean, I didn't mind this movie, don't get me wrong. I thought it was a pretty good film, and I love that John Saxon was back in this. And he was himself, and then all of a sudden he became Nancy's dad again. I thought that was really cool. I love that. And it actually had the guy with the leather jacket from the first movie. If you notice during the funeral, he's standing over there. And it was pretty cool. He wasn't even in a shot of the film. He was just standing there in the funeral.
Yeah, Rod Lane was in it. And so was Tuesday Night from Nightmare 4.
Now, I got to tell you, Vince, one of my all-time favorite parts in this movie, there's two of them really, was when she went in there to get her kid, and that nurse is standing there with a syringe, and the other nurse stuck her kid, and she just clocks that nurse, and she falls her. Oh my God, I rewound that and watched it like 4 times. I thought it was the funniest freaking scene I have ever seen. Oh my God, that was funny.
I absolutely love where she's standing there with the syringe, and she's like, well, I know what's in that one. Do you know what's in this one, or do you have any idea?
And then she walks out into the hallway, and then she like elbows the same nurse in the stomach. She's like, ugh! And it was just, I don't know what the purpose of that was, but oh my God, it was funny. And then the other scene where somebody says something about a pass, she's like, screw your pass! I love that. That was one of my other favorite scenes.
Yeah, well, it was all stuff that was kind of looking back on Nightmare on Elm Street, you know. So, I mean, I love, and then of course, when the girl, the babysitter, Julie, when she dies, it's like Nightmare on Elm Street when Tina dies, you know, he drags her up the wall and the ceiling. I love that scene too, because it was the same, but it was also different, because here's Freddy dragging her across the ceiling, and then I love the scene where, just for that moment where he's standing there, and he actually clicks his head around, like, and looks at the kid, and he said, what does he say? Ever play Skin the Cat? I love that. I mean, that was so cool.
So overall, for the final Nightmare here, I would have to give it a 5 out of 5. I thought that it was really inventive. I really liked the fact that they brought Robert Englund as himself, and they changed Freddy up, and the whole ending of it was cool. And I don't know, it was a really good Nightmare film. It was more of a Twilight Zone type of episode, But again, Nightmare could be that, and the first one was sort of like that, but this one kind of was like that on steroids.
I would also have to give this movie, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, a 5 out of 5. I absolutely love this film. I love it. I loved it from the first time I saw it. I love it. I've loved it ever since I've seen it. I love it. I've seen it every time I've seen it. I've loved this movie. I love it. Alright, now we have the extras for Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And first up, there is a commentary to this film, to this one. They actually brought the commentary from the Laserdisc over to the Blu-ray here, and it was on the DVD set as well. So it's the same commentary that's been there since like 1994 or so.
I started listening to this. I didn't get through the whole thing, but I actually may go back and listen to the rest of it because it was really good. I was kind of surprised on how good it really was. It was just Wes Craven talking, and he basically talked about how he came up with the idea. And the one fascinating thing about this film was the big earthquake. She kept having these earthquakes there, and they actually had a massive earthquake, I think after the movie was filmed or during it or something. So they show these TVs in the kitchen, and they're all showing the footage of an earthquake, and that was the actual footage of the actual earthquake they had that he went back and inserted later. So I thought it was really kind of cool the way he made this.
I thought it was cool that he did that too, because it actually gave even more a realistic thing. That, like, this is actually happening at that time, at that moment in time, all of this was actually happening.
And one thing he said too, which kind of surprised me, which I wouldn't argue with him about, was that he thought I called her Leather, Vince. She's Leather Hagenkamp.
Leather Hagenkamp?
Leather Hagenkamp came back for the third movie, and she was real stiff in it. He said she just didn't seem like herself, like she was really her acting was very stiff in it. And I agree with it. I think she was. Even though she was good in the movie, she wasn't I don't think as good as the first film. I think that might have to do something with the fact that the whole idea of her having a stalker in real life, he put into the film. So I wonder if that, if that is what kind of changed her mind about, or if she was actually worried about doing this one because of that. Maybe that was on her mind at the time she was filming it. Like, is this guy going to start up again? Kind of what they do in the film. They're worried about the stalker that's in the film. That's, is he starting over again, or is it Freddy? Is it actually Freddy doing this? So the first extra is called Becoming a Filmmaker. This I really, really, really enjoyed. Is Wes Craven talking about how he got into films. Now, I don't know if I've posted it yet on here, but it's going to be posted sooner or later. I actually got the Arrow version of Last House on the Left. And he talks extensively about this, how he became a director, and how this was his first movie, and how he grew up in a family that wouldn't let him watch any horror movies, and he never saw any horror movies until he was in college. And he talks all about that again, so I've heard all that. But what I really like about this was he wanted to become a director. But he couldn't become a director, so he ended up getting a job as a teacher, but then he ended up quitting the job and moving to, I guess, Hollywood to become a director. And he couldn't become a director. He couldn't find anything. And so he ended up becoming a taxi driver. And he was driving a taxi there just to make ends meet. And then he ended up moving back and becoming a teacher again because he just couldn't live out his dreams there in Hollywood. So he came back and became a teacher again. And then that's when he met one of his students who ended up writing Last House on the Left, and that's where it really started for him. So it was a really fascinating interview with him. He also ended up being a crew member on Sean S. Cunningham's Friday the 13th, the original Friday the 13th. He actually met with him on Last House on the Left, but he became a crew member on Friday the 13th. And
actually filmed a little bit of Friday the 13th, the original one, with Sean.
Up next is another 2-second clip called the trope of, what's it called?
The Insane Troop?
Trope?
Troop.
Trope.
Trope?
Trope.
Troop.
Leather hanging camp, Vince. That's all I gotta say.
Leather hanging camp. Well, actually, Wes Craven talks about Texas Chainsaw Massacre in here, so maybe that's where you were getting the leather thing, maybe?
Trope.
I love it.
But this is a 2-second thing where he comes on and says, people should be afraid of me. They should be afraid of directors. The end. That was it.
Next up is an extra that actually really does deal with Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and once again, it's Wes Craven talking about how he came up with the concept of doing New Nightmare and having it relate to reality, and how everybody at the time was, trying to pin stuff that would happen in reality, like some mass murderer decides to go off and kill somebody. Oh well, that he got it from horror films because he watches horror films. That's how he went off and killed 3 people.
And he also talks about how they approached him to make this movie, and how he basically just said it was real good money, and that's one of the reasons he did it, because they paid him a lot of money to do this, apparently.
But he had also worked things out with Bob Shaye and New Line Cinema at the time. He finally worked things out with them because for a long time, since Nightmare 3, he and Bob Shaye weren't getting along because of the rights of Freddy Krueger. It was kind of like New Line Cinema took over everything and was giving him nothing for it. So when he talks about getting money, a whole lot of money to do this, yeah, I guess he did.
Last up here is called Filmmaker, and it's interesting because he talks about what he wanted written on his grave after he died, and of course he's not here anymore. So watching that makes you kind of like, oh, well, that's an interesting extra.
Overall, on all these extras, I liked what they had on this one, but at the same time, it was like, again, it's just clips of Wes Craven for the most part. And it's not that they weren't any good or anything, and it was interesting to listen to him, but it's just, that's pretty much all this was. And it wasn't anything of like behind the scenes. It wasn't anything, there was no deleted scenes. There was no alternate takes. There's no nothing. I had the Laserdisc of this movie, and there was alternate takes and deleted scenes on that, as well as probably about 20 different TV spots for this. So they only showed the trailer. They showed the original trailer on this, but there was actually like 3 or 4 theatrical trailers for it and like 20 TV spots. None of that's on here. So I don't know if it's on the bonus disc or not, but this is what I'm getting at, is this is pretty much bare bones. And there was a lot more on other formats that have come out before and that were a lot more interesting.
That's it for the movies. That's all of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies except for the remake, which we are still debating if we want to do the remake or not.
But until then, I guess we could show you how to skin a cat. I love it.